Leaders from nearly 200 countries attend the UN Summit on Climate Change. They face increasing pressure from citizens around the world to act decisively. Talks between Venezuela's government and opposition press on, with accords to be presented to citizens in 3 weeks. And over 500,000 stranded after British Airlines Thomas Cook collapsed. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Venezuela's national dialogue table between the government and the opposition continues to make advancements. On Monday, 8 complementary dialogue tables were set up to move forward with partial accords over the next 20 days before being presented to the Venezuelan people. After the meeting, the communications minister spoke about the government's long-standing willingness to resolve issues via dialogue and their commitment to peace.
We have always maintained an unbreakable position in support of dialogue and of peaceful solutions to consolidate peace in our land. And we have succeeded at this, as Venezuela is a country of peace, despite the permanent threats lobbied by extremist parties, by the international right wing, and North American imperialism. On the 16th of September, when we established the National Dialogue Table, we made it clear that the President insists all doors are open to reach bilateral agreements. But we can see that the Venezuelan right wing has many disagreements among themselves. And one of the main obstacles we've faced so far has been these many splits that exist within the right-wing parties. So we hope they can resolve their own issues behind closed doors, and that they can separate themselves somewhat from the administration of Donald Trump.
Opposition lawmaker Timoteo Zambrano spoke about the need for the U.S. to lift economic sanctions if they want to support elections in Venezuela.
We have clearly rejected the economic sanctions. We did so in the September 16 agreement. We have also said that any election in Venezuela cannot be held under these sanctions. So that's a matter we have to resolve, not because we have the capacity to lift these sanctions, but we believe the US government has to negotiate with the Venezuelan government to resolve the issue. The removal of these sanctions is the main request of the Venezuelan government, while our main request is establishing a date to hold elections. Personally, I think there must be negotiations soon between both governments. If the US continues to support elections in Venezuela, they have the responsibility to negotiate the lifting of the sanctions. I believe the already announced parliamentary elections are in danger because it's impossible to campaign or hold elections under these sanctions.
Leaders from nearly 200 countries are attending the United Nations Summit on Climate Change in New York. They are facing increasing pressure from citizens around the world to cut greenhouse gas emissions and slow global warming. Ahead of the meeting, the World Meteorological Organization said climate change is accelerating as carbon emissions continue to rise. It said the world is lagging far behind the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. On Friday, the World Climate Strike, led by school students, saw millions of people around the world demand immediate action from governments. Now, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, addressed the summit on the need for immediate action to be taken by the world's governments to fight global warming. She warned that any global temperature rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius would be catastrophic for small island developing states.
Mr. Secretary General, forgive me for my bluntness as I am constrained by the 180 seconds to speak on the fate and needs of 20% of the United Nations membership as we seek to save our countries and our people from the ravages of devastating hurricanes, droughts, and fires, and the insidious slow onset of acidification, ocean acidification, and sea level rise. The science is clear. And the evidence is even clearer that the lives of our people have been lost and properties abandoned, and these tell the story far better than any speech we can make in this great hall. The AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, needs to keep temperatures increases in this global community to less than 1.5 to stay alive. Not to thrive, but to stay alive. In other words, 2 degrees needs to be taken off the table once and for all.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Alan Chastanet, listed some of the issues that need to be resolved to help small island developing nations in the face of climate change.
And that for the last 4 years, that we have been crying out loud that the clock is ticking for us. We are in the middle of our hurricane season and 9 months away from the next hurricane season. Yet, our voice is not heard. We have said repeatedly that the OECD needs to change the way it classifies developing countries, and that we've asked them to adopt the vulnerability index that was established in 1989 by the Commonwealth Secretariat, 1989. 2, that there needs to be a dedicated fund. So even though there are funds that were allocated yesterday to double up for the Green Climate Fund, the SIDS continue to lament the fact, the difficulty of us drawing down on those funds. 3, that once we establish those funds, the governance procedures that now manage those funds needs to change to take into consideration that the next hurricane season is upon us, and that we can't wait for a typical 5-year project cycle. And lastly, that how we classify the debt that we're going to incur to invest in this infrastructure cannot go on our books, because what we may gain in physical climate change resilience, we're now going to lose in economic resilience. The sad reality is that those 4 things require a pen. A pen for OECD to change its policy. A pen to establish a dedicated fund for the SIDS. A pen to change the governance structures, and a pen to determine how we're going to classify the debt. And time has run out on us. And we are pleading again to please allow the SIDS to build the adaptation that is required in order for us to deal with the other issues that we have to. As Prime Minister Motley has indicated, that we're soon going to be uninsurable.
Bolivia's President Evo Morales spoke at the Alliance for Rainforest meeting on the sidelines of the UN Climate Summit. President Morales said the recent fires devastating the Amazon rainforest should serve as a wake-up call for taking action against the climate crisis.
As we say in Bolivia, unity is the only possible way against adversities. Today we are suffering from the impact of climate change across the planet. Our Mother Earth is in great danger. While we keep waiting for developed countries who bear most of the responsibility in this climate crisis to fulfill their commitment of cutting back their carbon emissions, our people continue facing stronger than ever hurricanes, droughts, fires, and other extreme phenomena.
Our correspondent Jorge Histoso is at the United Nations with the latest.
Thank you. It has already started here at the United Nations what is being called the Climate Action Summit. Why 60 countries over the 193 that are the members of the United Nations? Because in order to participate, the countries has to come with a proposal, a solution to this emergency that is taking place around the globe. 60 countries. The summit started with the presentation of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. After that, he was having a conversation with the youth. Remember, that is a movement of youth that has already forced these people to start involved in a subject that has been postponed for many countries. For example, for the U.S. that is not participating, the U.S. Is pretty reluctant that the climate change exists. President Trump has said that the climate change is a Chinese hoax. And also another one who is not present is Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, that many people in this planet is blamed for the deforestation and the huge fires that has been taking place in the Amazon jungle, the lung of this planet that produce about 20% of the oxygen of the planet. Most definitely, what we are going to be seeing throughout this one-day event is much of our Latin American countries also present. This morning, the first one to start is going to be Chile, followed by Costa Rica, then it's going to be Colombia, in the afternoon it's going to be Ecuador. Some of the world leaders that are very much emphatically defending the commitment to fight the climate change are the German Chancellor, talking about Angela Merkel. She's talking also this morning, followed by French President Emmanuel Macron, which precisely France in the year 2015 has signed what is called the Paris Agreement, a commitment to diminish the actions of that are really harming this planet. Very important, the event, because it's a way to create awareness all over this planet that action needs to be taken. Just for mention, just a couple of figures. For example, the last 4 years were the hottest years in history, the recent history of the planet, in terms of the temperature rising all over the world. In the case of the Arctic, it has risen 3 centigrades Celsius since 1990, and that's definitely action needs to be taken. That's why this summit is being called the Summit of Climate Action. We get back to you now.
Our correspondent Jorge Gestoso brought us that report. Now, as Tropical Storm Karen heads towards the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, Tropical Storm Lorenzo has formed in the eastern Atlantic. In an update on Monday, the U.S. National Hurricane Center said Tropical Depression 13 has been upgraded to Tropical Storm Lorenzo. Now, Lorenzo is likely to become the next hurricane of the 2019 season and joins Jerry and Karen in the Atlantic basin. This effectively means there's a trio of active tropical storms spinning in the basin at the same time. Lorenzo is expected to intensify quickly. And while Trinidad and Tobago is still reeling from the effects of Tropical Storm Karen, citizens on the Twin Island Republic are being warned to brace for more torrential rains. The warning comes just 24 hours after intense rain flooded streets, brought down trees, and caused power outages on the island of Tobago. Rough seas also damaged Tobago's jetty and nearby boats. Floodwaters also swept through the Scarborough compound of the national power company TN Tech. Over 20 of its utility vehicles were underwater, and in West Trinidad, several yachts were destroyed by raging seas. Water also swept several homes and vehicles, leaving many trapped. The Met Office says heavy showers are expected to arrive this Monday afternoon and continue into tonight.
And it's normal. Mommy.
The intense rains caused landslides throughout Tobago and Trinidad. For one family in the community of Champlain, that reality came pretty close to home. The terrifying moment was captured on camera.
Mommy?
We'll take a short break now. When we come back, the funeral for an 8-year-old killed by military police in Brazil has ended. Join us for details in a few. Welcome back. The relatives of 8-year-old Agatha Felix mourned her death at a funeral on Sunday after she was killed in her favela by military police in Rio de Janeiro on Friday night. Agatha was hit by a stray bullet during a confrontation between military police and alleged drug traffickers in the favela where she lived. She was in a vehicle heading home at the time she was struck. Agatha was traveling in a taxi van with her grandfather.
Did she have a pistol? No. Do you know what was inside her backpack? Lawmakers of Brazil, of Rio, of other countries. Do you know what was inside her heavy backpack? A pencil, a notebook, a sharpener, books, and the test she took this week, where she got mark of 7.
This is not the first time, and unfortunately, it will not be the last. But we have to go to the streets to fight for our rights. We have to go to the streets demanding justice, because it's an unbelievable thing that a child of 8 years old was killed inside a van that was inside the favela, in a van we thought was a safe place, but it wasn't.
Friends, neighbors, and relatives accompanied the coffin of Agatha through the favela where she lived to the cemetery. Neighbors say the police may have been shooting at a motorbike they thought was suspicious. In 2019 alone, 16 children have been shot by police in Rio de Janeiro, some of them fatally. The government of Nicaragua has denounced attempts by the opposition to destabilize the country. Let's take a look.
This is how the streets of the country look. Normality has returned to Nicaragua after the failed coup attempt in April 2018. Yet, the country's opposition continue trying to disrupt the peace.
Every moment is appropriate when it comes to driving the country to the right direction. So we will remain here, persevering in this fight that has turned into a fight of resistance.
Meanwhile, this is the atmosphere in other parts of the capital. For 22 years now, Inés has owned this restaurant in one of the city's most popular avenues. She starts working early in the morning.
They have to understand that they cannot and will not, because the majority of us wants to live in peace, to work in peace. We want a free, healthy, sovereign country. We do not need to submit to these small groups that are destroying our country. That's all they do. They destroy.
Sociologist Bismarck Ciero says there is clear evidence of who's financing these attacks.
The people of Nicaragua can't be fooled twice. What do I want to say with this? That these groups try to convince Nicaraguans through social media, but now they are not believing it. Now the people are here now. They are aware of the situation. That is why we don't see so much movement on the streets like the first time. People behind this are not the leaders. As a leader would have moved hundreds.
For its part, the government of Nicaragua is calling for peace. They are developing social projects to build a better economy for all citizens.
Across Liberia, more than 11,000 health workers held a nationwide protest over pay and a lack of equipment. Pregnant women also blocked a key intersection in the eastern part of Monrovia because they were turned away from a clinic due to the strike. According to the Health Workers Association, most employees have not been paid for 6 months and do not have basic equipment like disposable gloves.
Our reason for blocking the street is that we came here at the hospital at 4 o'clock in the morning and the people say they will not treat us because the government has not paid them for 4 months.
We want to tell George Weah that he owes the people. Let him pay the people and let the people see about us. We must not be suffering like this.
In Kenya, a classroom has collapsed in Nairobi, leaving 7 children dead and almost 60 injured. Rescue operations are underway at the Precious Talent School, and the injured have been taken to a nearby hospital. The cause was not immediately known, but authorities have warned that up to 40,000 buildings built without approval in the capital are at risk of collapse. 3 years ago, a residential block collapsed in Nairobi, killing 51 people following heavy rains. Somalia's armed forces on Sunday repelled an attack by Al-Shabaab fighters on a military base on the outskirts of the capital Mogadishu. The fighters gained access to the heavily fortified base by ramming an explosive-laden vehicle into the gates of the base. They took control of the base for more than 5 hours before they were forced to abandon it after military reinforcements arrived. Al-Shabaab is fighting to topple Somalia's internationally recognized government, which wrestled control of the country from the group in 2011. Coming up, more violent protests rock Hong Kong. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. British travel firm Thomas Cook collapsed on Monday, leaving over 600,000 travelers stranded and sparking the UK's biggest repatriation since the Second World War. The British government launched emergency plans to bring over 150,000 travelers back home from destinations including Bulgaria, Cuba, Turkey, and the United States. Hundreds of passengers have checked into a rescue flight at Malta's Valletta Airport, while in Tunisia, around 4,500 tourists wait to be repatriated. The 178-year-old group has blamed Brexit uncertainty for a recent drop in bookings and declared bankruptcy after failing to secure $250 million from private investors.
Some main concerns is kind of the knock-on effects this will have for the UK economy. It's also quite a bad sign when one airline goes bust like this, but also presents new opportunities for other airlines to kind of take over. But because Thomas Cook is kind of staple British brand, it brings in concern about whether foreign investors will want to come in, and obviously with Brexit looming and everything like that, it does bring in some economic uncertainties.
Our correspondent Joanne Ortiz has more.
Thomas Cook Travel Group's bankruptcy has affected more than 600,000 tourists, leaving them stranded at several airports around the world until further notice. Until now, the British government has denied any efforts to rescue the company, but decided to set in motion a repatriation plan that will last until October 6th and will bring more than 150,000 British citizens back home. This will be the largest peacetime repatriation effort ever mounted since the Second World War. Stranded holidaymakers are waiting for answers in airports around the world, such as the Canary Islands Airport and the Palma de Mallorca Airport, where the Thomas Cook Travel Group operated for the last 2 years. Here, several flights have been cancelled in the last 2 hours.
That was Joanne Ortiz with that report. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on Israel and Palestine to exercise restraint and solve their differences through dialogue to safeguard regional peace and stability. Xi made the appeal during a meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi in Beijing, where they discussed the situation in the Middle East and Gulf region. Xi also said China is ready to work with Iraq to push their bilateral strategic partnership to new heights. Meanwhile, Iraq says it is committed to easing tensions and avoiding war and vowed to enhance communication and coordination with China in this regard. Iran has released a British-flagged tanker seized more than 2 months ago. The Stena Impero tanker was seized in mid-July as it passed through the Strait of Hormuz after Iranian officials said it had violated maritime regulations. The release comes a day before Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is set to meet with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York, and also following the release of an Iranian supertanker off the coast of Gibraltar that UK authorities accused of carrying oil to be sold to Syria in breach of EU sanctions. Hong Kong was again rocked by violent protests this weekend. Rioters vandalized a subway station and then clashed with riot police outside a mall on Sunday. Inside the mall, masked vandals defaced a Chinese flag, which was stolen from a nearby government building. They then threw it into a river. The rioters allegedly planned to once again disrupt operations of the Hong Kong airport, but their plans failed as police increased security checks. Throughout the weekend, these violent protesters also attacked citizens who disagreed with them. On Saturday, a man was left bloodied after he expressed his disapproval of the US-backed movement. A number of other citizens were also beaten up. And on Sunday, video emerged of these so-called pro-democracy protesters beating up a man and then kicking him until he lay bleeding on the ground. The victim of this attack had allegedly confronted the vandals after they stormed an MTR subway station to vandalize it. That brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.